She walked to her front gate. She stood above the gate, and on the first Saturday, people saw that she was standing there at a certain time. And so they said, oh my goodness, Aung San Suu Kyi has been freed. And then the next Saturday, she stood there at the same time, and people had gathered. And she began to do this every Saturday, every Sunday, until eventually 20 people led to 100 people. That led to 10,000 people. And every one of those people that came out risked imprisonment, possible torture. At the very least, they would be severely interrogated. Many of them lost their homes. Many of them disappeared. But they risked tremendous circumstances to participate peacefully in unifying this revolution.
Aung San Suu Kyi, now known as Burma's prisoner of conscience, was born as the third child of Da Khin Chi and Baeoki Aung San on June 19, 1945. Aung San was Burma's most cherished hero, having led his country to freedom from the British and Japanese rule towards the end of World War II. A bright future seemed in place for Burma, and a democracy was slowly establishing under Aung San. However, on the fateful day of July 19, 1947, while Aung San was in the midst of a government meeting, he was shot in the back of the head by a political rival, U Sa. Burma's hero has been slain. Just 1 month after her second birthday, Aung San Suu Kyi was left as a fatherless girl, living in a world of brutal violence and under the rule of the junta, the same group that took the life of her father. Aung San Suu Kyi grew up with her mother and older brothers in the capital, Rangoon. Since then, Burma's repressive government constantly raided the small traditional villages throughout the country, arresting or killing anyone who perceived as a threat. In 1960, Aung San Suu Kyi moved to India with her mother and continued her education at Lady Shri Ram High School at New Delhi. She graduated in 1964 and traveled to England to pursue her education at St. Hugh's College at Oxford. There, she met Michael Ayres, a student studying Tibetan culture. They were married in 1972 and had 2 sons, Alexander, born in 1973, and Kim in 1977. While Aung San Suu Kyi was in England, Myanmar was still undergoing dramatic political changes. The citizens demanded rights that the government did not authorize. The ongoing repression and brutality led to what would later be known as the 8888 uprising. This occurred on August 8, 1988, 8 minutes past 8 o'clock. Thousands of protesters, mostly consisting of university students, were calling out for a democratic reform as they marched through the streets of Rangoon. The government responded with brutal force and caused a gruesome bloodbath, killing an estimated 3,000 protesters.
At about the same time, Aung San Suu Kyi was informed that her mother was suffering from a severe stroke. She hurried home to Myanmar to care for her. Aung San Suu Kyi was again immersed in the violence, oppression, and terror that had already cost her her father. It drew her into the firestorm of Burma's crisis. She soon gave a major public speech on August 26, 1988, before a crowd of 500,000 people. She peacefully called for the democratization of Burma, saying, "I could not, as my father's daughter, remain indifferent to all that was going on." Aung San Suu Kyi's political career had begun, and she started touring the country, giving powerful speeches and urging the citizens to fight for democracy. Quickly, her political speeches drew the attention of the junta, who in turn responded with lethal brutality, such as the killings of innocents. On December 27, 1988, news reached Aung San Suu Kyi that her mother's life had been claimed by a serious stroke at the age of 76. After a huge funeral procession, she made a vow that she would bring an end to the ruthless Burmese government. Continuing the struggle for democracy, Aung San Suu Kyi boldly confronted the military at the Irrawaddy Delta, with no protection at her side. She calmly walked past them as the soldiers trained their rifles at her. As a result, the military placed Suu Kyi under house arrest for challenging the authority of their power. During her early year of house arrest, Aung San Suu Kyi was living a life of solitude. She could not see nor contact her family. When she was released, she leapt back into the struggle, just 2 years after her arrest in 1990, the State Law and Order Restoration Council, also known as the SLORC, held Burma's first free election in over 30 years.
Aung San Suu Kyi and her party, the National League for Democracy, won in a landslide election, gaining over 60% of the votes and 82% of the parliament seats. Unfortunately, the junta refused to hand over power, and the regime imprisoned the opposition leaders, resulting in Suu Kyi's second house arrest. During her house arrest, Aung San Suu Kyi won the 1991 Nobel Peace Prize due to her work for democracy. Her son, Alexander, accepted the prize upon her behalf. He gave a speech that opened the eyes of many people and influenced many others.
Even those in power now in Rangoon must know that their eventual fate will be that of all totalitarian regimes who seek to impose their authority through fear, repression, and hatred.
Aung San Suu Kyi was released in 1995, but her political activity was extremely restricted throughout Rangoon. The junta, well aware of her international reputation, was anxious to be rid of her. The government encouraged her to visit her family, with the stipulation that if she left, she could never return. Meanwhile, her husband Michael in Britain had developed prostate cancer. Aung San Suu Kyi stood tall and firm in ensuring a bright future for her country, although she was ridden with worry for her husband. Without a last goodbye, Michael R.S. died on March 27, 1999. Even after the death of her husband, the junta showed Aung San Suu Kyi no mercy. In 2002, the junta once again put Aung San Suu Kyi under house arrest. She was briefly released in 2002, and then detained once more in 2003. The government's patience was wearing thin, and on May 30, 2003, Aung San Suu Kyi and her caravan were attacked by government-paid thugs as they were heading around town of Yeu. In the encounter, at least 80 of her supporters had been massacred. Aung San Suu Kyi managed to escape the mayhem with her driver.
However, she was soon arrested and thrown into prison. This slaughter became known as the Dipyi Massacre. After being released from prison, Aung San Suu Kyi was once again forced under house arrest. Despite the repeated arrests and repression, Aung San Suu Kyi has devoted her life to bringing democracy to Burma. Her personal sacrifices are testimony to her everlasting belief in freedom and the love she had for her country. She has won more than 20 awards, 2 of which are the Sakharov Prize from the European Parliament and the U.S. Presidential Medal for Freedom. The money earned from her awards was given to the Burmese people. Throughout her life as a human rights advocate, she has written a number of books, including Freedom from Fear, The Voice of Hope, Letters from Burma, and Aung San of Burma, a biographical, which was a biography of her father. The strict dictatorship in Burma's government prevents Burma from becoming a democracy. The citizens strongly express their dislike of lack of human rights that have been stripped away, which caused popular discontent to rise. During September of 2007, thousands of monks in Burma marched through the streets of Rangoon for 3 hours, and incredibly, the military did not interfere. All around the world, people have been using Aung San Suu Kyi's method of peaceful protest to get global awareness of Myanmar's conditions. Worldwide insurrections have been held to demand the release of Myanmar's hero, Aung San Suu Kyi.
Democracy ရအောင်လို့အမျိုးသားဒီမိုကရေစီအဖွဲ့ချုပ်ကဘာလုပ်နေလဲလို့မေးတဲ့အခါကြလို့ရှိရင်မေးတဲ့လူတွေကိုကျမတို့ကပြန်ပြီးတော့မေးကြတယ်ရှင်တို့ကရောဘာလုပ်ပေးနေလဲဆိုတော့ဘာဖြစ်ဆိုတော့လူတိုင်းဟာဒီမိုကရေစီရေးအတွက်တစ်ခုခုတော့လုပ်နိုင်တယ်တကယ်ပဲစိတ်ဆန္ဒရှိလို့ရှိရင်လုပ်နိုင်ပါတယ်